Okay, paying the costs of cathedral construction, part one, because we are going to have two distinct parts to this. This is going to be due at the end of class tomorrow or at the end of the school day on the 7th. The first deadline applies for most of you. Check to make sure you know which one is yours. This is going to be part of our next notebook collection grade. I just say that because some students will see that something's worth 0 points and will be inclined to think they don't need to do it. You do. Please open your world history notebook to page 65.
Is there something different we need to do?
Yes. Yeah. Let me. If I can get in and I'll find it. You're still looking for that church power module.
Wait, is this notebook check due at
Yes, at the end of the hour. That's what I'm going to collect. And yes, and the grades, this is not going to be part of this notebook grade. It's pages 13 and 32 to 56. So this is on page 65. It's not part of today's grade. Yeah. Yes.
So like for the notebook day, I don't like you know that I don't have one, right? Like that
I knew you had not had one like a while back, but I thought you'd found it. So
No,
never.
No, yeah, I never found it.
Okay.
It's kind of like but like I think Jocelyn's gonna let me print it off. So like I needed like a plastic piece. So don't you have to take off the plastic piece?
You'll just have to staple it in like different bunches and just kind of keep it together. Yes.
62.
Yeah.
You said 36.
For the notebook grade. What we're doing today is going to be on page 65 in your notebooks. Yeah. Okay. No, that's what I'm going to explain. Just had lots of other questions. So don't worry. Okay. Why? Well, what are we learning about? What you are learning about now is how important cathedrals were to medieval European communities. We're going to get a sense of the scale of the massive resources that they devoted to building cathedrals. You are also, in the process, part of this comparison, going to learn how the U.S. spends its own economic resources. The reason we're learning this is not just about medieval societies, although that is important. This is to give us kind of a sense of how societies choose to allocate their resources to different priorities. It helps us understand what our society values. It helps us understand what medieval societies value. Okay, so this, along the way, is also going to give you kind of perspective to understand the ways our country might spend its resources differently. Right? Because our country does things a lot different than a lot of other countries in terms of how we spend our money. As always with this, kind of the way we're going to learn this, we will have our usual quizzes, check and correct stuff to make sure we've got the right things. But what this is building up to is you making an argument about how some societies are choosing to spend their money today. All right, now, this is where the assignment itself picks up. We're going to start through this before I turn you loose. You have already learned last week about those beautiful cathedrals that were meant to be cities of God with beautiful flying buttresses and stained glass windows, all kinds of things. As you might have guessed from the video about cathedrals, these things were incredibly expensive to build. In fact, about 10 years ago, a scholar named Amy Denning did some pretty serious work and was able to calculate that on average, the communities that decided to build a cathedral devoted 21.5% of their economic resources to building cathedrals. And they did this over an extended period of time. For us to get some sense of that, we need to use GDP. That's why you learned about GDP yesterday. That's how we can think about economic resources. We're going to do this part together, conduct a quick internet search. 56. Nope, still stops at 56. To find the GDP of the United States for that year. Okay, we want that in trillions of dollars. So let's go. This is actually not as easy as it used to be. And that's one of the reasons we're going to do this together. I want to make sure that we have got the same number, because I don't want that first thing that shows up. I want that one from our own government. Okay, this tells us, and guys, these things are often very complicated. This is no exception. You learned yesterday GDP has a lot of moving parts. Governments take it very seriously. Ours is certainly no exception. So we get a little bit of talk about the growth rate, which was fast. This equals out to be $26.14 trillion, which you need to put here in that blank. The U.S. GDP for that year was $26.14. The $1 trillion part is there for you. You just need to write down 26.14. All right, everybody have that in that first blank? Now we've got to do a little bit of light math. We need to multiply that number times 0.215, because that is how we represent that percentage as a decimal. The first one is going to be 26.14. Okay, so if we take our 26.14, bless you, multiply that by 0.215, we get, we call that $5.62 trillion. So here, right, in that second blank, of course I lost it, 26.14 times 5.62 in that second blank, $5.62 trillion. Okay, everybody got that in that second blank? Okay, so this tells us that that's kind of like the modern American equivalent of what medieval Europeans spent to build cathedrals. That would be like if the U.S. decided that it was going to spend $5.62 trillion a year building massive churches. Now, as we do this, I realize that thinking about trillions of dollars is kind of hard for us just to really process or wrap our heads around. And that doesn't mean that you guys can't think about numbers. I'm not saying that you're bad at math, but none of us has $1 trillion to work with. Right? The richest person in the world, I don't know, is it still Jeff Bezos or is it Elon Musk again?
Elon Musk.
Anyway, it's one of those. But is it Bill Gates again? Yeah, still, even then, right, they don't have $1 trillion. So
You don't know who Bill Gates is?
Bill Gates is one of the founders of Microsoft.
Tesla, Microsoft. Microsoft's been around.
No, that's Zuckerberg.
Every computer.
What's his name?
Bill Gates. Okay. So, to help us kind of break this down, we're going to look at the federal budget. Now, this is where I'm about to turn you guys loose. It's not you guys can work together, right, but we're not going to do this as a whole class. And this, right, just in case you get away from this, think back to these directions here in Canvas. Hold on just a second, Joels. Okay. Your notes are pages 65 to 68. You're going to use the internet, which we've kind of already done. You've got some infographics on pages 66 and 67. And then for your final question, you've got this video. Okay. Now, I don't actually expect that you guys are going to get to that video today. We're going to spend some time with that tomorrow. But picking up here, this is where you're going to need those infographics. You've got to look at this one to figure out kind of the 3 ways the U.S. government spends its money. They're all listed there with that infographic. Now you see that there are 2 different categories for most of the spending, mandatory and discretionary. Do some internet searches. Just look up the words mandatory and discretionary and write the definitions that you find. So I know, guys, you're sidetracked by billionaires. Again, make sure once you get finished with that first page, using the first infographic, you're going to look up definitions for the terms mandatory and discretionary to understand what these different categories of spending mean. And then you're going to move on to page 68 and see what mandatory spending cost the federal government in 2022. And that's going to be with these infographics there. And it will also tell you what percent of GDP that was. So you're going to use those infographics as you go. If you get through all of that, that final question is going to be answered by you analyzing the video in the Canvas page. All right. The question you're trying to answer with that video is, why should we think about America's defense or military budget more like mandatory than discretionary spending? Don't stress out about that question yet. You may not know enough to even process it yet, but you will by the time you get to it. Okay. All right. Work together. Ask me if you have questions, and I'll let you know when it's time to move on to the exit slips and notebook collection.